Hey guys, welcome back to the Animator Guild podcast, where we talk about the creative process, respond to audience questions, and explore big ideas which cannot fit into ordinary YouTube videos. This episode is centered around the topic of when to use animation and when to not use animation. To me, this is an important topic for a range of animators and filmmakers. Zachary Sparrow is an up-and-coming animator, writer, and graphic novelist. He is well known in the Animator Guild community, where he is a moderator. During our time as friends in the community Discord, we've had many interesting conversations ranging from films and animation to history and politics. Although for the conversation you're about to hear, we have tried our hardest to avoid straying into politics. Instead, we focus on the tactical advantages and the fundamental differences of animation versus live-action film. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Zachary Sparrow. So, what was the title we agreed on? When to use animation.
When to use animation.
When to use animation. You see, we had been talking about this before.
And I think that with animation and when to use it, the answer, we could talk about it for a long time. Because I think that animation can deal with any subject, period. So whether or not you would want to use live action or animation is an aesthetic choice. It's a filmmaking choice. And it does have consequences, but I think it's important to remember that any subject matter can be done through animation.
Yeah, it's extremely versatile. It's more versatile than film. So I guess we should, the closest neighbor to animation is probably film or art, paintings and pictures. It's almost like at the crossroads between the two. It has elements of both. But I think of it particularly as film. I think of myself as a filmmaker, and I think of animators as filmmakers a little bit. I feel like to me it seems a little bit closer to film than it is to art, conventional art. And the difference there between live action film and animation that I can see is that with live action film, it requires a slightly less of a leap in one's imagination to get there, because we are being presented with realistic light, realistic rendering, I guess you could say, and that is similar to what we see every day when we open our eyes. It's like we're looking through someone else's eyes, compared to animation, which can also be made to look like that, but by default it doesn't. By default it looks like a constructed image, and so it just requires a little bit more imagination on the part of the viewer to make that jump. They say that now I don't want to get controversial here, and just remember guys, I am an animator and I'm all for animation. There is a point of view that children like animation. One of the theories of that is that children have good imaginations and they make that leap very easily. I personally think that it's actually a very small leap to make, especially if you make animation that follows realism in some kind of way or follows some kind of logic. But anyway, so one of the advantages of film that I've noticed is that you can use it to make it appear like it's the truth, or like it's very real and valid. And one such example that I thought of was Waltz with Bashir, which is an animated film. I think it was released in 2004 by Ari Fullman, who's the director. And
it's an amazing film. You should all see it.
Yeah, it's a great film. Really iconic, I think. Well, maybe iconic's the wrong word. It's recognizable. It's distinctive, and it's an animated film, which is not necessarily for kids. It's more of a sort of adult audience that it's aiming towards, I would say, and deals with very adult issues, war and politics and things. But I just remember in one of the last scenes of the film, he switches from animation to live action, and when asked why he did that, he said that the entire animation, it was an animation about a real event. The massacre that the film was kind of talking about, that was at the center of this story, he wanted people to make sure that they didn't, he wanted to make sure that it was seen as a real event that actually happened. And so he used real footage from real documentary footage about it to kind of hit that point home, that it was a real event.
Yeah, and I think that was the most powerful moment in the film. But it's interesting because, I mean, yes, I think that live action film is a medium that can create the illusion of realism very well and better than animation. But I think it's important to also remember that any film you make, whether it's a drama or a documentary in live action, you're still recording something from a particular point of view. There's a way in which, like, you know, the cinematography choices or how you edit it or what music you use is all going to tell a particular story. And so, like, you think about, like, watching a documentary and you think, like, hey, look, this is objective truth. These are facts, but it's all filtered through the point of view of a filmmaker. And I think that what's interesting about animated documentaries is that, like, the veil is just like unlifted, and you see, oh, wait a minute, I'm seeing a filmmaker's perspective. And so, in a way, animation is being a little bit more open and honest when it's used in a documentary form, because it's like going purely into the subjective viewpoint.
There's no hiding the fact that it's a construction.
Yeah, I think Michel Gondry like talked about that in the introduction to his animated interview with Noam Chomsky. He touched on that point. I thought, yeah, I should take note about that. But yeah, I mean, like, so yeah, animation can just go completely into that direction. But I would also make the argument that for certain types of acting, animation is really good at creating a better illusion of reality than live action is. And my example would be, look at Miyazaki's children's films. And like Miyazaki is like a filmmaker who's really well known for his fantastical settings and, you know, stuff like that. And people talk about his vivid imagination, which is all very true. But I think one of his greatest strengths as a filmmaker is his ability to observe the behavior of children and how they act. There's like a lot of like really eccentric motion and actions that you like never see in a film. Like if you compare like something like My Neighbor Totoro to a myriad of live action films with talented child actors, think about like the personality of like a child actor. Like typically they are very intelligent, they're precocious, they're kids with good vocabularies, they're like really well behaved. And so you kind of like, when you see a live action performance, like often an actor will bring their personality to the screen, and that's something that we love about watching films. We like to see that person, and we want to see like realism in the performance, and so there's a certain type of spontaneous childlike action that I think is really hard to do. But if you control that as an animator, like you can get some of those little moments that you observe in life, but you don't necessarily see in a staged environment on a film set, right? And so I think like, yeah, so like the acting style is something that you have a lot of potential with animation. Just depends on like how you render the characters and like what art style you're using. So like you can go like full blown fantasy, but like authentic performances, I would argue, is a strength of the medium.
Would you say that is hyperreal? It's a sort of exaggerated realism?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak about hyperreality because I think there's like, that word is used for a particular. I don't exactly know how that term is supposed to be used, so I don't want to like use that word specifically. But it is a way of accentuating certain characteristics of reality and perhaps exaggeration in the same way that a theater performance is exaggerated. Right?
Yeah.
You know, I think animation acting is closer, and especially hand-drawn animation is closer to theater acting than it is live action acting, because you don't necessarily get the subtlety of facial expressions. So if you want to do like a drama that's all about like subtle facial expressions, you probably don't want to make an animated film, because it's just not the right medium.
You can, but it's challenging.
It is.
Yeah. It's
and
actually
you should probably
surprisingly
use CG, because it's a little easier to get subtle like facial tics and changes with a CG character.
It's interesting what Disney as a company and as a collective of artists, what they did for the medium of animation, because people now think, because of Disney, people now think that animation was designed for character performance, but it's really not. It's like, that's a challenge of being an animator. Like, that's something to work your way up to, and it's actually a very advanced thing to be able to emote a character as if they're living and breathing and thinking. But Disney went straight for that, and that's because at the time, with film especially, it was the film industry was so centered around character performances that they had to master acting for animated characters. But just going back to the Hayao Miyazaki point, I just wanted to show another kind of example for that, because I recently watched Laputa, Castle in the Sky, and I did notice a really nice moment that they put in there, when the boy whose name I've forgotten, he goes to play the trumpet in the morning.
Yeah.
And he puts it to his lips and he blows and gets, and it doesn't quite work. And then he takes it away, he wets his lips, and then he does it. And that I thought was absolute genius, because in animation you wouldn't have that problem. Like, an animated character by default does not have that problem, and so they had to think of the idea of him making the mistake and then write that in. Now, interestingly, with film, the likelihood is with film that it could happen the opposite way round, where the actor really does make that mistake, the camera is rolling, and the director says, "Ah, you know what? That was really good. Let's keep it." So
yeah, I mean,
that's really interesting to me, that with film, I guess that's an advantage of film in a way, that actors can make mistakes.
You have far more room for improvisation for actors to ad lib to, let's point the camera over here. And, so it's far cheaper to make big acting changes than it is in animation. Every single shot costs money in animation. And so it is, I think, one of animation's greatest strengths and weaknesses, that you have to plan everything. And so
that must add to it, the fact that it's contrived.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you can make that contrived performance feel very real if you know how to honestly depict your characters, if you observe from life. That's very important, to observe people's quirks and characteristics. It's something that I'm still trying to work on, and not just focus on, say, drawing a good figure, but also drawing a good behavior. And I think that could be why with Disney animators they always stress gesture drawing and observational, just quick line of action sketches, as opposed to detailed, rendered, anatomically correct figures, is because at a big animation studio like Disney, they want their animators to observe form, right? Yeah. And so
they also give the advice of base a character on someone you know in real life.
Yes,
they often say that.
It's an old adage with writing too. Write what you know, not just so if you write based on your personal experiences and your worldview and your if you base your writing on personal experience, your content will be a lot richer.
I do find that statement interesting, though. Write what you know, because that to me is a real paradox of a statement, because you don't have a choice there. You have to write what you know, because if you don't know it, you can't write about it. You wouldn't know it unless you're speaking in tongues. You can't write about what you don't know. So but I've heard it said the opposite way, where like people disagree with that. Some writers disagree with that. I think it was the writer of Grey's Anatomy, who I've been listening to a lot of masterclasses, and she said, I like to write what I don't know because then I can research it, and then that keeps it alive for me if I can research a topic to write it, and it's an opportunity to learn.
Well, I think that research and like writing about something you might not know everything about in the subject, so that you can get excited about research, that's wonderful and that's great. I think it's important when you look at a saying like write what you know and distill it to its essence. It's about the emotional core and truth about what you know, about human relationships, about people, about what your philosophy of life is and how you've lived your life and perceived things from yourself in your own emotional lives and what you see in others, right? And so I think what you know isn't necessarily about like superficial topics. It's about the underlying reality of your lived experience.
Yeah, I call it universal truth.
Yes, absolutely. And I think some people might contest that concept, but yes, I would agree with you. It is about finding that truth and getting that on the page. You see that sometimes so when a writer doesn't write what they know, they might be like, say, maybe a kid who's writing about relationships and they haven't had
or a cop drama
experiences or a cop drama or something about maybe like social issues that they haven't really experienced themselves, and then there's a kind of naivety to the interactions with other people and the dialogue, and so that's why living your life and getting a lot of experiences is important, because you need to build up that database of truth in yourself to really express something meaningful. And I think that applies to fantasy and science fiction as well, because at the end of the day, you're still writing stories about human beings and human aspirations. Even if it's exaggerated and mythologized, it's still about something that you value personally. So yeah, truth is always important. Sure.
All right, I like where that went, but maybe I should steer it back onto animation, because I don't.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm just aware, I got to make it somewhat relevant to the animators watching. Although I think animators of all kinds need to be good storytellers. It's always going to help to be able to tell a story with animation, because that's the hierarchy. The hierarchy of importance is that animation is like quite low down on that, and it always takes orders from the story. So it doesn't matter if the animation looks great, it's got to take orders from the story. But anyway, so I just want to talk about the difference in limitations for animation versus live action. Like, some things in live action are really hard to do, but they're really easy to do in animation. And one example I had was space travel. Like, space travel in live action film is very difficult to depict. And to, zero gravity, people floating around in zero gravity, rockets flying to other planets. It's easy in animation. Like, that's an easy thing to do, have a rocket taking off and going to the moon. In live action, that's incredibly difficult. They often use miniatures. I was really interested in the behind the scenes of Interstellar because of how little they used CGI and how much they used CGI, but whenever they could, they used miniatures. A bit like in 2001, which it took a lot of influence from. But the opposite is also true. So in animation, I always think character performances are really hard in animation. It's tough to do character performances, but they're pretty easy in live action. Kind of like we've already talked about with the improvising and things like that. So really it's about the different mediums have strengths and weaknesses. You want to kind of, when you can, you want to avoid the weaknesses and go to the strengths. One more thing that I found very difficult when I had to do it in 2D animation was a ship at sea in the waves, in the storm, and I found that really tough. So there are certain quirky things like that that are kind of difficult in animation.
So I have a counterpoint to everything you just said. I
Ooh.
think that, yes, it's difficult, but everything in animation is difficult. So I think we should look at the end result of the thing itself. Because think about it. Interstellar, I haven't seen it, but I know Christopher Nolan is an amazing filmmaker, and I trust you when you say that that movie looks great. And think about how many people say, "Oh, I wish there were more practical effects in the movies." Like people talk about like Mad Max Fury Road as an example of like an amazing piece of cinema because of all like the practical effects used, right? It's difficult to do, but the end result looks better than if they just resorted to CGI. The thing that is more difficult also led to a better, more pleasing end, right? And I think the same is true of character acting. It's really tough to do in animation, but when you can get those results, animation can do something with character acting that you can't do with live action. And
That's
so
true.
I
It's like
think
a
that
reward for the hard work.
exactly. And so I think what you're saying is true in terms of like if you want to you're trying to weigh out the advantages and disadvantages of making a film and the difficulty of achieving a task is one of your considerations, then sure, I think everything you said is true.
I'm
But
an
I think at the
animation
end of the
producer. That's why. I'm an animation
and,
producer.
and I think that that is a prudent decision. So as a producer, I totally understand what you're saying. But if we jump into the theoretical for a minute and think about like an amazing auteur who could like make a perfect live action movie or perfect animated film, I think that the question comes down to, on a theory level, is about aesthetics. It's like, what kind of aesthetic do you want to get, right? And in my very controversial opinion, I think that I would draw a distinction between animation as technique from animation as an aesthetic. And like what I mean by that is if you look at a lot of CGI heavy films like a Marvel movie or something like the Planet of the Apes trilogy, they have a lot of animation in them, but no one ever like looks at those movies and thinks, "Hey, that's an animated movie," because the animation is rendered in such a way where it's trying to look as realistic as possible. And I think that the end result is something that feels like live action. And I think that the feeling of the kind of shot you're going for as a filmmaker is more important. And so that's what the audience kind of like receives, right? So I think that if you're talking about making an animated film, I'm thinking about the like making something that looks like a cartoon or something that looks really hand drawn or hand painted in some way. So what is the best way to achieve those effects if you're going for that look? And so I'm really trailing off here, but
Keep going.
but
You can do
I just
it.
wanted to make that I just wanted to make that point though, because I think that like there was a lot of controversy about the CG remake of The Lion King because
Yeah.
Disney was trying to market it as a live action movie in the same vein of their live action remakes of Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella and so on. But the thing is that every single shot in that movie is animated. It's
Yeah.
computer generated stuff. And so from a technique standpoint, like yeah, it's an animated movie, and a lot of people were upset about that marketing because people felt like it degraded and undervalued the hard work that went into creating those shots. Right, there are a lot of gifted VFX artists who worked on that movie. But filmmakers, I mean, film goers, like your average Joe, went to that film and thought, "Oh yeah, it's a live action Lion King," and
Yeah.
so they felt like it was a live action movie.
It's
And
VFX. That's the
yeah,
definition of VFX is that it seeks to be it seeks to be seen as live action. Like it's disguising itself as live action. It wants to be photorealistic, but it's actually animated underneath.
mm-hmm. And so I would argue that that VFX is not animation as an art form; it's just animation as a technique. And
That's
so to
interesting.
use
Yeah.
a metaphor, to use like a metaphor, it would be sort of like how we understand a tomato as a fruit botanically, but
Yeah.
in the culinary arts, tomatoes are considered vegetables because they sort of taste more like a vegetable. And I think VFX like tastes like live action, and but it like it in its DNA, it's animation. And so that's
Yeah.
sort of how I view it. So Like,
that's interesting. I like that. That's an interesting idea, separating the I suppose the intended look of an animation rather than the sort of practical means to an end with the animation. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, and we have different views.
Yes.
These animated feature films or animated series which could have been filmed. They're set in ordinary environments. They have ordinary characters. If they're Japanese, then a lot of the time the characters have extraordinary colors of hair. But other than that, they look pretty ordinary. They're fairly down to earth, and it just begs the question, why did they draw this out frame by frame, thousands of frames to draw this when they could have set up a camera on a tripod and hit record with actors and captured those, like we were talking about, improvised performances, nuanced performances with ease. So my point of view has been, for the longest time, if I'm going to make an animation, I'm going to strive to make an animation that I wouldn't be able to make with live action. I just wouldn't be able to film it for practical reasons, or just like, it just doesn't fit within the realm of the real world.
Well, I think you're thinking like a film producer, which is
Really?
understandable. Well, yeah, because you're thinking, well, this doesn't seem practical. It would be far more cost effective.
I suppose, yeah, I am
to
thinking
just
practically.
film the actors, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is if you look at a lot of this slice of life anime, it's gorgeous. Like, think about like the films of Isao Takahata, like a film like Only Yesterday or Grave of the Fireflies. Like, these are movies with like no fantasy elements at all in them, but there's a way in which the animation is employed beautifully. Like, have you seen Only Yesterday?
I haven't seen Only Yesterday. I've seen clips from it. I've seen Grave of the Fireflies.
Oh, okay.
And I do think, but I think with Takahata, he's an interesting one because he usually has like one or two very like subtle, small things in his films that couldn't be filmed. Which, I mean, arguably you could use CGI for, but
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So the reason I brought up Only Yesterday, which is a beautiful movie and you should definitely see it.
Okay.
The story revolves around this woman who's about 30 and she's single and she's going to this countryside. And as she takes this trip to this farm, childhood memories occur to her. When the film cuts back to the childhood memories, everything is very simple and cartoony, and the backgrounds have a watercolor rendering to them, and so the backgrounds are not vivid because it's a memory and it's sort of just in the back of her mind. But like when you cut to present day, the characters are rendered very realistically. There was a lot of attention to facial expressions and getting an authenticity to it. It's one of the few anime films that had pre-recorded dialogue instead of being dubbed, because the animators wanted to use live action footage as reference for like trying to capture realistic facial expressions from the voice actors. And so there's this contrast between the more realistically animated characters and the more cartoony characters. And that visual contrast is something where the drawings bring your attention to a particular environment or expression with an extreme narrow focus, right? And so this story could have easily been told in live action, but the entire feel and atmosphere of the film is transformed by virtue of the fact that it is animation. And so it's like, why would you want to do a live action film adaptation of a Shakespeare play? Shakespeare wrote his plays for the theater. You know, it's made for one medium. And yet filmmakers over and over again have been trying to translate Shakespeare into films. And you do have to sort of like adjust your sensibilities when you translate Shakespeare to the screen. But nevertheless, you can still tell those stories through film, and sometimes really well.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, I think, like, to go back to what we were originally talking about, I think that like you can tell any story of any genre in any media, especially when you consider that, yeah, from a production standpoint, you have to think about like what to use for live action and what to use for animation. But like from a storytelling, aesthetic, visual standpoint, if we establish that if a VFX shot feels like live action, then it's in the live action medium. So, you can tell a science fiction and fantasy story in live action or animation. It all depends about the aesthetic that you want to go for. So
you're kind of coming at it from the unlimited budget scenario.
Yes, because I'm the temperamental artist type. So
a man can dream.
Exactly. But I think we need both types of mentalities, because we need producers in the world to remind filmmakers of the practical limitations that they're dealing with, and someone who can effectively organize that is vital for creating things that actually happen. So I don't want to undermine that perspective. I just think that if you want to get excited about storytelling possibilities, it's good to keep that in mind, that you're going to have to make adjustments, but you can tell any story in any medium. I very firmly
I'd have to fully put that to the test and really think about that. I mean, I'm gonna try and challenge it, but I mean, it sounds correct. I just need to sort of think. So then, if we assume, let's just assume that is true. So then it becomes like, what is right? Because then you've got to you're looking at it not from a practical point of view, but from like, how does this make you feel versus how does this make you feel? Like, and that's pretty interesting. Like, what is the effect of something being hand drawn, animated, with paper? I've looked into this quite a lot, because as a freelance animator, where the service that I sell is creating custom, sort of like bespoke. This is how I try to do it, is like bespoke animation for clients. And so I've had to think, why should a client hire an animator over filming it themselves? Like, if you really want the message across, you could get your phone and record yourself saying the thing, but that's not what they want. Why do they want animation? It's really important, if you're selling a service, to have a very good understanding of what your strengths are, what it is you've got to work with. And so the kind of thing that I think of is like, okay, frame by frame animation, it's got 100-year history. It's done traditionally on paper. So it's got pencil on paper, it's handcrafted, and therefore it has this sort of, it's been made with care. You have to make it with care, because someone has literally drawn every frame. And I think that's great for certain corporations to want to foster that kind of feeling, and so for them that could be a reason. I'm thinking about it commercially now, just because that is my line of work. But yeah, that's one of my experiences when thinking about what the intended effect is of something.
Well, you notice that you said that one of the things that you want to appeal to your potential clients with is the feeling of it, right? And so that's still an aesthetic decision, and that's kind of within the theoretical boundaries of what we're talking about, right? Because at the end of the day, like if a client wants a live action commercial or an animated commercial,
I don't think it is entirely aesthetic. I think it has links, maybe invisible links, to certain emotions and certain feelings as well. Like, I can think that recently I received a handwritten letter from someone, and wow, like, I was blown away. I was really like touched by it. Someone wrote a letter. Mail. Yeah, someone wrote a letter to me, and I was like, my God, I'm not worthy. You
should get a pen pal. It's a great experience to have a pen pal.
I've bought all the stuff. I've bought a pot of ink. I've bought a book on calligraphy. I love the idea of calligraphy and handwriting letters. I've bought the wax stamp to
nice. Oh, nice.
Yeah, the whole works. Yeah, the whole works. And my W for Wimshurst. I've got the whole works.
That is fantastic.
I'll
send you a letter now. Let's be pen pals. Let's do it.
Well, you know what I'm like. I love the idea of it, but taking the time to sit down and do it, I still haven't found the time to actually learn how to do it well. But yeah, anyway, I digress. But that is an emotion that, you know, is linked to just paper. You know, it's an emotional connection I have with paper.
So I have a question, because you said that isn't aesthetics. How do you understand the term aesthetics? Because I would I guess argue that our emotional and subconscious feelings towards things is a part of an aesthetic presentation. So I guess we should
maybe it is.
Clarify what we mean by that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe that does fall under aesthetics. What wouldn't fall under aesthetics for animation?
I mean, I guess the thing is, like, this is where we get into interesting or tricky semantic territory, right? Because because when I say animation aesthetics, I'm just talking about how it looks and feel, and everything that look and feel implies. Okay. So that includes your emotional attachment to the way in which it's presented, whether it's a charcoal drawing or something done digitally, or watercolor, oil, pastel, whatever medium you're using, you're going to have a certain association with that. Choices of color, these are all things that we have, like, there's like cultural associations with things like color choices, right? But at the end of the day, that is an aesthetic. I would argue that our feelings towards things are a part of that. So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know where to draw
in that case, though, that would definitely fall under aesthetics, those kind of emotional associations to different mediums. When I think of aesthetics, I usually think of instinctive sense of, you know, aesthetically pleasing. What is aesthetically pleasing? You know, a lily is aesthetically pleasing because of the shapes, the colors, and those kind of things. But a lily by itself, it doesn't communicate anything about the story. You know, if you had a story about a certain thing and you put in lilies, but it had nothing to do with the central themes of the story, you just thought lilies looked cool, so you decorated the frame with lilies, then that would be an aesthetic choice. It wouldn't it wouldn't go further than that. It's kind of like a surface level thing.
Oh, okay, yeah. See, I have a totally different understanding of aesthetics, because, like, in philosophy, aesthetics is the branch of philosophy of art and everything that implies,
yes,
right?
It is. So,
so, like, when I think about it, I just think about, like, just artistic things in general, and, like, every important aspect of artistic decisions. So my definition of aesthetics is really broad in that sense. So
I use aesthetics like that because that seems to be how it's thought of right now. The most
kids
common
these days.
The most common time you would use the word aesthetic is, like, I mean, I've been a lifelong gym goer, like going to the gym, and you hear it at the gym. You know, if someone looks aesthetic, it's like they're in good shape, they look good. That's when the word aesthetic is used there. So I'm just thinking of just pulling from things like that for a sort of modern day definition.
Yeah, see, I live under a rock. I live like a monk, and I was social distancing before it was cool. So it's good to know these things, what your average person says.
I've thought of another case study of a time where animation was used for something where it would be very difficult to use it with live action. And that is in the case of the Uncanny Valley. I find that very hyper-realistic animations and films struggle often with the Uncanny Valley. Visual effects, they have to navigate it so carefully, and they so often get it wrong, especially during the early 2000s. There were so many problems with the Uncanny Valley where they couldn't get out of the Uncanny Valley in VFX. And they were trying to, but they just didn't have the technology yet to do things like render hair and fur and subsurface scattering, things like that. 2D animation, there is very little problem there with the Uncanny Valley. You can sometimes encounter the Uncanny Valley in 2D animation with rotoscope works. In fact, that's probably the only time when you will. And certain designs are uncanny. you can design something to be uncanny, and that could be an accident sometimes. I think I've seen it with maybe like Sonic the Hedgehog. Certain designs of that has struck me as uncanny.
The old Sonic design?
That is
because they redesigned Sonic to actually look good.
I was actually thinking just before that, the cartoons. Like,
okay.
I also met a girl in college where I said, "Oh, there's this really cool show. It's an anime," and she was like, "Anime?" And she was scared. She was literally scared, and it's because she, for some reason, her Uncanny Valley sense was dialed up a lot more than other people. She was more sensitive to it, and she found pretty much all anime to be uncanny, which I found pretty interesting. So that was a rare case. Yeah,
she's missing out.
Yeah. I think I was recommending Death Note to her, so it's her loss. Okay. It really is.
Well, I don't know. I think like stuff like in the shonen area, I think that's cartoon enough for me. Like, and I think for most people that would be the case. Like, I find that surprising that someone would find that too realistic. Because I mean, at the end of the day, like you still have simplified forms and like really cartoony eyes and hairstyles, and you know, like you can't mistake it for live action footage, but.
Well, that's the thing. It's when it's close to live action. It's when it's not live action. When it's close to looking real, but not quite.
Yeah,
and so
I think that anime is like pretty far removed from realism. Like even though characters have realistic proportions, like they're still cartoons.
Yeah.
Like,
so she was a bit of an anomaly. In most people, it's not an issue, but that was an interesting case.
But I think that the Uncanny Valley is still something that artists are still struggling with. Like, look at the new Star Wars 9. Like, that had some scenes with a CGI Luke Skywalker and Leia, and it just did not look good.
Right,
like, Rogue One did that too with, I forget his name, but there was that character from the original movies that was in it, and just, it looks so weird to see a CG human, like, interacting with, like, live action people. It was... No, it made me really uncomfortable. So even with the cutting edge technology and the best artists in the world, like we still haven't got CG human right yet. So.
Yeah. I'm pretty ashamed to say it, but like if that girl that I knew back then was very sensitive to it, I'm probably quite insensitive to it. I've watched a number of films where they've had like CG replacements and people have gone, like, oh, wasn't it creepy that they had a CGI replacement there with mocap and everything? I was turned around like, well, that wasn't real. Like with the Princess Leia shot where she turns around and she's like, Hope. Yeah. And I gotta admit, I was like,
really? Yeah. See that
I was like, I thought it was a different actress. I thought it was just like, I thought they just did someone up to look like her. Yeah, the first time. And then when I watched it back, I was like, oh, yeah. But maybe it was because I was in the story. I don't know.
To be fair, if you're watching it like with low res, like if you're watching it 480p, like on a low resolution TV or something like that, I could imagine that you could mistake that. Because like I've seen CGI footage that looks realistic on low resolutions.
Yeah.
Like if it's like someone sharing a video on Facebook and it's like running at like 360p or something like that, then you can maybe. So
that's a good
if you're
point.
watching it on Blu-ray though, on a big TV, or on the big screen, you really notice the difference.
Like IMAX kind of thing. Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting point. That because they seem to keep on pushing for higher resolution, which is also making the job of the Uncanny Valley harder in a way.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. I had one case study of where they navigated that problem. Well, they didn't have to navigate it at all. So, and we keep on coming back to Hayao Miyazaki in this episode for some reason, and Studio Ghibli. But yeah, in Howl's Moving Castle, the main character, she goes through a lot of transformations where she is first, there's a curse put on her, where she's becomes very old, and then there are some incredible scenes of character animation where she's literally talking, and in front of our eyes she gets younger, which is, my god, like that is quite astounding to watch that. I was just amazed. But I think that would be really hard to do in live action because of the Uncanny Valley.
I think that well, I don't know, because CGI makeup is getting really good these days, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen The Irishman. Like, I haven't watched it yet, but like I've seen the trailer, and the CGI makeup is incredible.
It is, yeah, that's true.
And so, I mean, if we have that kind of technology, then it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that they could make a live action Sophie who's like aging before our eyes and make that convincing. What I love about the Howl's Moving Castle film is that her aging and de-aging is imperceptible. Like, you don't notice it because she just like subtly changes between cuts, and it feels so natural because her aging is reflecting her emotional state that you just like sort of buy into it. You don't even consciously realize, oh, wait a minute, she's aging now. So I think part of it is also the editing too, like just between cuts. Because you get so involved with the story that you don't notice it.
That could be a funny way of doing it in live action. Just cut away from her, cut back as she's a girl.
Oh yeah. Maybe in live action that might not be the best kind of cut to make. You might want to like do some kind of CG effect. I don't know what's involved with digital makeup or de-aging, but or aging and de-aging, but I think you could do it. And I know that a lot of fans of Howl's Moving Castle, of the original book, don't really like the movie because Miyazaki strayed so far from the original story. And so
I haven't read the original by Diana Wynne-Jones. Diana Wynne-Jones, is that her name?
It's really good. It's a lot of fun. I'd recommend it. Definitely check it out.
I've read others of her books, and I liked them a lot. But did Miyazaki... Did he Miyazaki-fy it?
Well, yeah, basically. Well, also he was really angry with the United States and the Bush administration with the Iraq War, and so he decided to put an anti-war message in it. And so the whole war subplot did not exist in the book. And also, like, there was like a whole plot about like how they went to the real world. Like, Howl in the book is from Wales. So there's like a bit of like dimension hopping between like the fantasy world and the real world in the book, and it's a very different story. Diana Wynne-Jones loved the movie though. Like, she said that it was great, and she didn't want a literal adaptation of her story. She wanted something different, and so she appreciated Miyazaki's spin on things. So
that's often the way with me. It's like I want the film to use it as material, but then to bring something new to the table with it. I mean, why not?
Yeah, for sure. Because like, why would you do an adaptation if you're not creating something that justifies the existence of an adaptation?
Absolutely.
So I think that's important if you're like adapting any story, is like, what can you bring to the table? And that's where the question of things like animation or live action come in, right? Like, if you're adapting a novel, what do you want to bring to the table? Or maybe you're making an animated remake of a live action film or a live action remake of an animated film. What are you bringing to the table? In the case of Disney movies, not much. But I think that there could be a case for making a live action remake of an animated film that works well. Like, no good examples come to mind right now, but I think it can be done. Like, why not?
No,
If you can come up with a justification for it, then, like I said, any medium, any story, it just changes the flavor and texture of your dish.
Yeah.
And you're going to get something new and exciting if you have an artist who really cares about what they're doing, right? So, it's all about possibilities, people. Try things, experiment.
Yeah.
So.
I want to talk about transitioning, because we've talked about like the differences as separate entities, but there's a lot of opportunity that seems to come about when you transition from animation to live action or something else, But I was thinking of one example came to mind, which was Kill Bill, where the backstory of the forgotten her name, Oranishi, I think.
I haven't seen the movie, but I haven't seen the movie, but I know what sequence you're talking about.
You know the sequence.
I've seen the animated part.
You've seen the animated part, yeah. And they use that as like a sort of flashback, and that works really well in the film because the film itself takes so much from comic books as it is. It's so inspired by comic books and the kind of comic language. And then for it to be animated during the flashback, it works so well. And he went to the best animators, the best artists in Japan, Kazuto Nakazawa and Shinya Ohira, who is one of my heroes. But yeah, so that
he's
was
my favorite animator.
He's your favorite animator too?
Yeah, I love Shinya Ohira. His sequences are incredible.
Yes, he's one of my
heroes. The
fact
that they always stand out. Like, I remember pointing out his shots before even getting into Sakuga fandom. Like, it's like, oh, there's that style of animation again. I would like spot it in different films. And then when I found out it was the same guy, I thought, oh, this makes so much sense, right? So, yeah.
Oh, it's amazing.
Stuff. But was the Kill Bill sequence animated at Madhouse or Studio 4 Degrees?
I don't know. I don't want to go on record and say it's one thing when I don't know for sure. So I'd have to look it up.
Everybody in the comments section will attack us to get that wrong, I guess.
Yeah, not looking forward to that. But yeah,
sorry, we love you guys.
Yeah, so with Kill Bill, with that scene, they use animation to jump back in time. It's sort of like signaling. It's a way of, in film, signaling that they're in a different time. But you can also do it in different ways. Like, you could do it for jumping about in time, so you can have all the past tense stuff in animation, like they do in Kill Bill, and I'm sure there are many other examples. But you can also have it from like a film's subjective point of view, if the point of view changes from one thing to another. And then you've also got a lot of films who do it in literal terms. Like, there's an animated dimension and there's a video dimension, the real dimension, like the typical stepping into a painting kind of thing.
The Mary Poppins effect.
Yeah, Mary Poppins and whatnot. What was that film, Enchanted, was it?
Yeah, Enchanted. That one's good. I mean, another thing is, like, you can just like go to another level of abstract if you're talking about like just completely engaging in a surreal subjective experience. Like, I think Pink Floyd The Wall did a really good job with that with their animated sequences, so I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of like amping up the degree of abstract and intensity with your animated sequences as well, and like, so that's something you can do.
I'm wondering if there's more we might have missed when it comes to the advantages of animation, because
caricature is another one.
Okay, that's one.
Yeah, like, I mean, think about like something like the Triplets of Belleville. Like, one of the reasons why that movie works so well is like it plays with a lot of stereotypes, and accentuates those stereotypes through exaggerated caricature, and it does a lot for the humor and the entire vibes of the film. Like, you can do that with live action, right? And so if you want to, sometimes it's just a matter of like how you render characters. Like, I think that's how Brad Bird thinks about the difference between animation and live action. He said that you can tell any story with either medium. The reason why you would choose animation is caricature. And so certainly a lot of animation filmmakers think that way. So,
that's interesting. There are sort of caricatures in live action as well, in performances. I always think of Nick Cage as being a good sort of, he's like a caricature of himself. Like, he's so, he's like a
living meme.
He's a living meme. He's like, he'll always take that performance to the next level. He'll go further on the performance. I happen to be a very big Nick Cage fan. I'm one of those people who loves Nick Cage, not hates him. You usually fall on one side.
Do you like his bad movies, like Wicker Man and stuff like that? Oh yeah. No, those are my favorite Nick Cage movies.
Well, I like all the films he's in.
No, he's been in some great good movies too. Like Adaptation was fantastic.
Adaptation was really good. That's the film which showed to me, okay, this guy might be a joke, but he's also really talented. Like,
yes,
it takes a lot of skill to do that.
he has sort of a reputation of being a joke. I think it's just because he takes on any project. Like he did he was in the Left Behind remake. I mean, come on, So there's a way in which, even though he's an amazing actor, he still will take on any project, and so that sort of cheapens his brand in a way.
I suppose it does.
According to some people's perception of him, anyway. Like,
you could see that as different ways. Like you could see that as him being down to earth, or or like that he's not lost his humility. It's still like any opportunity I'll take it because I like to act. That kind of thing.
True.
Anyway, I like Nick Cage. Yeah, he's like an animation almost,
Well, Jim Carrey's another one.
Yeah, Jim Carrey.
If we're talking about human cartoons, like you can't get more of a human cartoon than Jim Carrey. Like I don't know how you can be that plastic with your face. Like the way he can like just distort his expressions, it is quite impressive.
Yeah, I feel like he's like invented new facial expressions, like trademark Jim Carrey.
Say what you want about the live action Grinch movie. It might not be a great film, but I think he did a really good job in that film with being able to emote under all those layers of makeup. Like the fact that he was able to get those extreme expressions is kind of an impressive feat unto itself. Like even if the movie on its own isn't that great, like Jim Carrey was still really good in that film.
Yeah,
I think.
I often wonder about films like Ace Ventura. The film doesn't work without him. Like he is.
No.
They like sort of built a film around him and his persona.
Actors are critical for movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, though. A big influence on box office numbers are who is the main lead character. And animated films have often used voice actors as that kind of star power. But how much of that star power translates across when there's an animated film with a star doing the voice acting? Because sometimes I've watched an animated film and then I've looked at the credits and be like, oh, that was a really famous actress playing that role, or that was a really famous actor.
Yeah. I think it's a waste of money, personally. I could be wrong, because maybe there's something to be said about the fact that I do talk to some people who aren't like as into animation as you and I are, and like sometimes a famous actor will convince them to watch an animated movie that they might not otherwise look at. So sometimes Hollywood names can give a sense of credibility to normies, but like I think that in terms of the performance, like use a famous actor if it makes sense, because you have to think about like when you're getting a voice actor, you need someone who's able to bring everything they got with just their voice. And some actors are a screen presence, and you lose all that when you go to an animated film, and their celebrity kind of means nothing, right? So if I was directing an animated film, I would not cast based on star power if I could manage that. I might have some stars, because I think that, for example, Shakespearean actors are probably a really good fit for animation, because Shakespearean actors put a lot of emphasis on diction in their words and the timing of how they speak.
Important. Yeah.
And so because speech is so important to an actor trained in that way, they can be good. So casting, say, Patrick Stewart or Ian McKellen, I think, I'll go ahead. In that case, celebrity voice actor, that makes sense. But sometimes, I don't know.
Well,
it seems like a bunch of marketing hype. Like, think about all those DreamWorks movies that had celebrity voice actors that were just garbage, like Shark Tale. Like, it had so many celebrity voice actors, but it didn't matter.
That Shark Tale was funny, because that was weird, because they literally had Will Smith's face on the fish. Like, it was Will Smith's face.
Yeah.
Strange.
That is actually Uncanny Valley.
yeah. Talk about Uncanny Valley. Yeah. But I don't know. Like, I think that some actors, like successful actors, I think that they often are great voice actors. I mean, Jack Black absolutely killed it in Kung Fu Panda. Like, he was incredible in that.
I agree.
And
Jack
I
Black
think he
is a
brought
really good
all
voice
of his
actor.
charisma with him to that role. Like, it really did come across, that charisma. And he did a tremendous job. And I can't think of anyone else who could have done a better job. Any other voice actor. I mean, you're right about the Shakespearean, anyone who can act Shakespeare has to be kind of a master of dialogue, of handling dialogue, interpreting it, thinking like, what does this strange, often cryptic sentence, how do I like say this naturally? Very true. But with acting performances, and I'm talking about live action actors here, I do think that the voice plays a very important part. The way the tone of their voice and the delivery of a line in the sound. I think people often underplay the role of sound in an actor's performance, and it's still vital how they, the vocals of an acting performance.
Well, I think with Jack Black too, like, he is a musical performer as well.
Yeah.
And so he has a really iconic voice, and like that's why it works so well for cartoons or voice acting in general. Like the lead character in the video game Brutal Legend, sort of like that game sort of spoofed a lot of heavy metal tropes, and he was fantastic for the role.
All right.
But no, I think you're right. We sometimes underestimate that.
I would not. If I was in charge of making a feature film, an animated feature film, I can't say I would be the same way about like deliberately leaving out A-list celebrities. And again, it's the film producer in me that just sees the practical merits of having A-list talent on there for two reasons. One is that they tend to bring good performances. They've got a lot of experience acting, and they can't get through that time without training their voice and training their line delivery. So they actually are good at their job when it comes to acting in them. The bad thing is that they're very expensive, very, very expensive to bring on, even for a short period of time. But then the other good thing is that they pull in extra people. More people see the film, and that's a good thing.
I think it was good that we covered voice actors, because like that is an essential part about considering the animation process, right? Because it is, I don't know if it's half of the performance, but it's still significant.
Well, I've been saying to people that audio should be treated as half. It really is. It's an audio-visual experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something about good sound that just completely changes the nature of your entire film.
It's amazing how it elevates the perceived quality as well, but also how it can be used in the story as a device, really, and for immersion and experience. But yeah, when it really got brought to my attention just how pivotal the sound was in the Animated Guild film contest 2020, when some of the entries didn't have sound, they were just pure visuals, and I think they still worked for the story, like getting across the information, but the experience was much greater, I found, on the ones that had good sound design.
Yeah, it immerses you in the world, and like you said, it elevates your production. So even if you're not quite there yet as an animator, you can still sort of create the illusion that you are an experienced filmmaker by good sound design. Sound creates all kinds of emotional responses in us.
Yeah, I know that's a writing technique as well. Like when you are taught creative writing, one of the big foundations of creative writing is use all the senses. What do you smell? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? They use all of them. What do you feel on your skin? That kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think that you can overdo that, but I think that's sort of a matter of just nuance. I mean, one of the wonderful things about prose is that it's not just the sensory experiences, but also the intellectual ones. Because there's no better medium for getting inside somebody's head than novel, because you can go through every single thought, especially since like this is kind of unusual for an artist, but I am a very verbal thinker. Like I can imagine visual things quite well, and I do have a vivid imagination, but a lot of my thinking is words. I think in words all the time. And so for me, like when I see a novel that goes through somebody's perspective, like that I see is reflective of my own thought process.
All right.
But evoking those sensory experiences in film is critical. And it's sort of a combination of the sound with the visuals. If you can get that balance right, then you've got something.
Yeah.
Don't neglect sound design, kids.
I'm gonna wrap it up, I think. Well,
yeah.
Okay, thank you, Zach, for joining me on the podcast.
That was great. I actually really enjoyed it.
And I'll probably have you on again when we get the chance.
Love to come back.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Thank you very much to my supporters on Patreon who help to make these videos possible, especially Jesse Labrie, Victor Helt, and Sonia. If you are interested in supporting the creation of this podcast and the other videos on this channel, the link to my Patreon page will also be in the description. Subscribe for more, and I will catch you in the next one. Goodbye.